Alrighty. Is this microphone on? If you can hear me, could you just notify me in the chat so that I know whether the microphone is on or not? Okay, that's great. Thank you, Brian. Oh, thanks. So I just kind of wanted to come on here and talk about the Rings of Power. Oh, that's unfortunate, Andrew, but thanks for coming in anyway. I just wanted to come on here and really just talk about the Rings of Power. YouTube has been annoying in terms of uh, allowing me to post, and I'm sort of just using any means at the moment to post on here. So we're going live for the first time. So this is my first live stream. I just wanted to kind of know your opinion of the Rings of Power before I sort of share mine. I know that a lot of people have had interesting things to say about the Rings of Power. I've seen some of the stuff that's been all over social media and um, the articles that have come out. Nerd of the Rings has been particularly vocal about their dislike of the Rings of Power. Hi, I can see you guys in the chat. But they've been particularly vocal about their dislike of the Rings of Power. So I just wanted to know what you guys think of it. You can write it in the chat, just for me to gauge whether people are into the show or not. Personally, for me, I think that you can't throw $1 billion at something and it come out horrible. There are going to be things about it that are awful, and there are going to be things about it that are all right, and there are going to be things about it that are great. So I think to be fair and to sort of just talk about the series in a fair and balanced way, I will admit that there are things about the show that are done well. And there are things about the show that are just god awful from a fan's perspective. So I'm going to start with the positives because I think that it's good to start off on a sort of positive note. So the first thing I like about the show is that visually it's pretty. It's a very visually pretty show. You can really see that they were going for the clean look. They really wanted to bring out the whole shebang. You can see that the money from the budget went towards the visuals and how it looks. And you can really see the sort of cleanness of Middle Earth. I think it fits with the whole theme of the Second Age. I don't think it's such a crime because the elves are still relatively in power. We're experiencing a sort of um, a new environment with the elves. Someone said probably would give it a 3 out of 10. The writing is very bad. A lot of characters are unlikable. A lot of the shots are good, but that doesn't excuse the awful writing. I agree. So I just wanted to praise the shots first before we get to the writing, because I do think where there is praise to give, we should try our hardest to give some sort of praise. And I think visually it's stunning. Um, they did try a lot with the architecture. So when we get into Numenor and when we go towards Lindon and all of the elven cities, it feels very much like time and effort has been put into the architecture. Not so much for the human dwellings, but I get that because during the Second Age, those who dwelt in Middle Earth were not particularly advanced, which is why the coming of Numenor is such a big thing into Middle Earth, and it's why the Numenorians are able to enslave those in Middle Earth and seek tribute from them. Um, because they're so underdeveloped and but yeah, the great visuals. Um, and I think when it comes to the writing now, when it comes to writing, it's really difficult to praise this show. I've been watching it with my family, and my parents aren't. Yes, I'm back, Callum. Thank you so much. But my parents aren't big Lord of the Rings fans. They're sort of the casual viewers. And I was really looking at their reactions to see whether this show would captivate them, because I won't lie, this show is a bit of a disappointment from a fan's perspective. A lot of the storyline isn't really pulling me in yet as a fan. The changes to the characters that we know are odd, but I think the most egregious change has to be Galadriel's character, but I'll come to that in a bit. So, as far as the story sort of goes, it's not captivating fans. So, I was really looking to my family's reaction to see whether it would captivate them as sort of lay people who don't know too much about Lord of the Rings and who don't necessarily care about any changes that would be made. However, um, they weren't captivated. They weren't really engaged. Even my dad, who really loves these sort of adventure fantasy movies, he was really struggling to sort of engage with the story. There was a lot of sort of passive viewing, which I don't think is what Amazon wants, especially when they've thrown $1 billion at this project. So on that level, if it's failing the fans and also failing casual viewers, bear in mind my sample size is quite small because my family doesn't make up the majority of the viewership. But if people who are just casually viewing this are not engaged either, it doesn't sort of bode well for the rest of the series. So, in terms of the general storyline, I'm not really being pulled in by it. Um, I will give one other bit of praise. I think that the Harfoots are not as detestable an addition as I believed they would be. They've been kept somewhat to a minimum, and I think that's good. Um, I would like to see a little bit less of them, to be very honest. But I knew they were going to show up, and they are not showing up as much as I thought they would, which is a plus. They're still showing up more than I would like, but they're not showing up as much as I expected, which is a good thing. So I'm going to praise that. So Flynn said, I feel like parts are intentionally bad in order to be remarkable, as like an attitude statement. The majority of their publicity has come from being bad or, in their words, controversial. The dwarves are the only ones I can bear. I sort of agree with that, to be honest. I think I don't know why they would make the show intentionally bad. Can see why they want a little bit of controversy. I personally think that when it comes to the whole some of the changes, it's not that they wanted to be especially controversial. It's that the writers wanted to leave their stamp on the work in the same sort of way that Peter Jackson did. But the thing is, Peter Jackson had the benefit of being the sort of first one to adapt the series a um into a live action. So there was the animated version before Peter Jackson's version, and then Peter Jackson was the first live action. So he was able to not only create the sort of premise on which future adaptations should have run, he was the first, and he did it so well that I think anything else was automatically going to be compared to that. And so when the series writers come along and attempt to make their own sort of unique take on Middle Earth, it's always going to be compared to Peter Jackson's version. And because it's not even living up to Peter Jackson's version, it's a lot more more hard to swallow for the fans. I think if you forget that this series is a Lord of the Rings series, it's decent. it's engaging enough when you take out the Lord of the Rings element. So, um, but when you bear in mind that it's the Lord of the Rings, it's Tolkien's work, it suddenly falls a lot shorter. Let's take the dialogue, for example. So Lego Lord has just said, how do you think the themes of the show align to what Tolkien was trying to convey in the book? I think that the show has been a bit heavy-handed when it comes to trying to apply certain themes and trying to align itself with the book at the same time as making huge deviations from the book. They really try to go with this theme of revenge isn't the best answer, but you really need to fight for something. And it's so heavy-handed. Galadriel is not likable. It would be different if circumstances forced her on this path. But really, what's happening is Galadriel is just too bullheaded to take a chill pill. She's too bullheaded to see that she's becoming a character that's not likable even by her friends and her king. She has no regard for the rules. She's not an admirable character. And one of the hallmarks of Tolkien's characters, especially the ones that he was setting up to be heroes, were that they were admirable. Yes, they had their flaws, but they were honorable altogether. They were likable. Boromir, even though he fell for the seduction of the ring, was never at any point a dislikable character. That's what makes his death especially tragic for the readers and the viewers. The characters that are set up to be heroes are actually fundamentally heroes, not just because they happen to be on the right side, which is the distinction I don't think Amazon has gotten right. Obviously, in real life, it's not the same way Tolkien wrote it. Tolkien's work is escapism. It's not meant to be realistic. So I don't. So the realistic element that they're trying to take with a princess who with an elven princess who's sort of finding herself and she's sort of bullheaded and I don't think that really meshes well with Tolkien's works. So Callum said Galadriel was not written as a meathead. Galadriel was written as someone akin to a powerful angel, someone who could bring guilt and destruction with a stare, yet has the peace and resources to help. I agree with that. That's definitely how Galadriel is written, and if the series was taking plus place in the first age, I can kind of get behind the current Galadriel that we have in the series because she was described as proud. She was described as somebody who wanted to take the bull by the horns. But in the second age, she is so different from that person. Remember, she studied under Melian the Maya, so she's seen the kinslaying at Aqualonde. She is a lot more mature than she's being portrayed. I remember watching the series and being really confused as to why Galadriel was making so many silly decisions, um, and making things unnecessarily difficult for herself. Um, when she addresses the Queen of Numenor, for example, she's just unnecessarily rude. And she has no regard for the people she's asking to help her. You don't need to be thousands of years old to realize that's a bad strategy. But Galadriel doesn't seem to realize this, and she almost goes in with this entitlement that's really obnoxious. Could this be suggesting first age Galadriel would make a decent cave woman for the position? I think even first age Galadriel is tamer than the show's portrayal of her. Um, I think Galadriel relied more on magic and her psychic abilities than she ever did on a sword, which is more akin to a red hell. A red hell was described as a huntress. This is someone who her weapons were actively in her description. Her friendship with Celeborn and Curufin make make us have a different sort of image of a red hell. But Galadriel's description was never anything like that. So I feel like they've tried to make her some kind of warrior princess, and it's so different from what we know. So I don't think the fans are taking that change very well, and I don't think she's a likable character enough for non-fans to really get behind her. So let's see. So DD asked, I do have one question. I, for one, question her decision to try and swim across the entire ocean after deciding last minute not to go to Valinor. That was very hilarious. I can't lie. When she jumped off the boat, when she jumped off the boat, I I was lost for words. I couldn't think of a more stupid decision to make because it doesn't make sense for her to make that sort of decision. It doesn't make sense for her to jump off the boat in the middle of the ocean. What did she think was going to happen? And I don't think it really speaks well for a character that's supposed to be wise and supposed to be sort of being built up to be this wise character to make such silly decisions. Um, I know she's bitter over her comrades sort of abandoning her, but if these are the sorts of decisions that she's making, then I completely agree with their decision to mutiny against her. This is not someone I would look up to as a leader. She's not showing any leadership skills. So even though we're supposed to feel for her, or the story wants us to feel for Galadriel and wants us to sympathize with the fact that she has been mutinied against and she's telling the truth because we know that Sauron is back. But outside of the plot, outside of the fact that we know that Sauron is back, there's nothing to tie us as viewers to Galadriel. There's nothing to make us like her. And that's worrying because that's not supposed to be the case. Um you're not supposed to be detached from your main character. Your main character is the vehicle through which your readers or your viewers are going to go through this story. And I think the very fact that Galadriel is not likable, the fact that she hasn't portrayed any leadership skills, the fact that she's stormed in demanding things, and not really being a team player, manipulating people, uh, trying to change situations for her own gain, regardless of what's going on around her. She storms into Numenor and says, "Hey, take me back on a to Middle Earth on a ship and bring your whole army with me," completely disregarding the political situation of Numenor. She has no idea what that is like, and I think that for her to do all those things and yet the fans or the viewers be condemned for not liking her is a stretch. She's not likable. I don't think there's any way that they can portray this woman as likable. So I'm just gonna go to the chat. Let's see. Amazon Guy Lateral has the magic of Mary Sue magic. So Lego Lord asks, why did Palantir say not to go to Middle Earth? Okay. I think he was saying that because it's difficult to say because they've deviated so much from the books. But I do think that what the foreshadowing scene was showing why the Numenorian queen's father was so not eager for her to go to Middle Earth is because I think he knew the trajectory that it would take. We do know that the Queen of Numenor is at some point going to lose her throne, or be usurped in some way. So I think he had an inkling that that was going to happen, and it would begin with going to Middle Earth. So I think that's why he probably said, "Don't go to Middle Earth." But it's so unclear whether they'll actually do that because they've taken so many deviations from the books already that it's if you're watching as I was in the beginning trying to piece together stuff that's in the book and stuff that's coming out in the series, you'll actually find yourself lost and it'll become a really taxing activity to watch the series. So what I almost had to do was just say this isn't Tolkien and watch it from there. And that's kind of how I was able to enjoy some aspects of the series. Um, so let's see. What would you say out of character, plot, theme is the most important part of story? So this is Joseph's question. I do not think that you can have a story without either any of those things. So character and plot are symbiotic. You can't really have a story that's great without characters, and you can't really have characters that are great without some sort of plot. Um, so I think all of them are important. It's really difficult to have a story without themes. You have to be talking about something. The plot, it's just basically what happens. So unless nothing happens, then you don't have a story. And character, it doesn't matter if your character is humanoid or not. It could be a plant, but something needs to attach us to the story. So you can't have a story without theme, plot, and character. And I don't think one is more important than the other. I think that sometimes we say things like there's a lack of plot in this story and it's really just around characters, but if your understanding of plot is that plot is just what happens within the story or the events that happen within the story, then I don't think you can say that any one of these things, plot, character, and theme, are not important, because I think they're all like really important. And with the Rings of Power, it's not that it doesn't have potentially great characters, and it's not that it doesn't have a plot that could be interesting, and it's not that it doesn't have good themes, it's that the writers don't know how to execute any of those things. And so it's really difficult to enjoy the story, because when you compare it to Tolkien, the things that are lacking are really lacking. And when you just take it out of Tolkien itself, it's somewhat enjoyable, but there are still things that are problematic in terms of just from a writer's perspective. Um, so not to mention, I heard by the next episode you'll still be swimming across an ocean bigger than the portion of land that people took days to traverse. So this is gonna contain spoilers just because I'm talking about it, but she doesn't swim all the way, which is, I think the writers at some point realized that there is no way. It doesn't matter if Galadriel can take down 10 mountain trolls with a pinky. There is no way she's swimming across the Sundering Seas. So they did create a way for her to make that journey without having to swim. So let's see. By some cosmic coincidence, she found some castaways from some other region entirely to pick her up. The whole show feels like a first draft. It does feel very much like a first draft. I think the decision to jump off the boat was ludicrous. I There is no way, as a viewer, I would ever trust Galadriel's judgment, because if it were not by some happy cosmic coincidence, she would be dead. And then there is no point of your mission if you died in the middle of the ocean. So I think um, that decision alone was enough for me to go. The writers really don't know what they want to do with this character. I think they just had some kind of idea about the sort of character that they wanted to create, and they didn't take the time to properly execute the characterization process. They didn't take the time to actually bring this character that they had in mind to fruition and work out what would be realistic and what would fit this character. And I think part of this is I don't know, and what it makes me worry about is whether they know where exactly they're taking this character. Where are they taking this Galadriel? I know for a fact, well, I'm hoping actually, I can't say I know for a fact, but I'm hoping that they have some kind of character arc for Galadriel coming up, because it would not make sense to have such a repulsive character continue to be repulsive throughout the entire series. There has to be some dramatic arc that makes her change and forms her into the sort of Galadriel that we're more familiar with. because otherwise she's just a detestable character that you could have written out of the story entirely. Um, so I'm hoping, I'm being positive that they're going to give us a satisfying character arc. So let's see. What would you say they're trying to convey by writing Galadriel as unlikable? Did they even know she's unlikable? I think they know she's unlikable because um I don't think you can sit down and watch Galadriel and think that she because everybody knows when someone's horrible. I Especially the people that we like to group in the woke factor. They know how to get offended. And if Galadriel spoke to them that way, they'd get offended. So I don't think they know that she's not unlikable. Um I think that the most logical thing that they probably have in store for her is a character arc, is some kind of I don't know whether Celeborn is going to show up at some point, and maybe through the power of love she heals. I I don't know how well that would go down, but I hope that it's written well. Um I don't know, maybe having people finally listen to her will calm her down somewhat, but I don't like where they've started with her. So I can only hope that in future episodes we see a dramatic change and a shift in the way that she treats people. So let's see. The show still seems to make Galadriel unlikable on purpose, with foreshadowing, like with Galadriel saying that she could be the wind that spreads the fire. I definitely think that the show has some kind of purpose for writing her in this way. Like I said, my hope is that there is a shift in her future. And maybe by being listened to, she is able to calm down a bit, or maybe characters like Halbrand will give her a different perspective. Because I sort of like the dynamic between her and Halbrand, where he's actively calling her out. It's not like he's sort of going along with it and saying, "Oh, you're just a powerful um, person, and you know what you want, and you're driven." No, he's telling her you're rude and you need to calm down, and you're doing things the wrong way, and you're going about it wrong. So I think that gives me hope that she will change, and that the writers know they're deliberately making her. Um, Unlikable, and that this is not the way to go about things. And I think that they're setting her up to know that she has to rely on other people, and know that revenge and this journey that she's on isn't necessarily the best way to go about healing whatever hurt she's gone through. I personally think that Galadriel should have been given a lot more pain to justify why she's acting this way. Because in the story, Galadriel lost all her brothers. She lost all her brothers, and she lost people that she cared about deeply. In the series, Galadriel has lost one brother, and I don't mean to be rude, but people have lost lives upon lives upon lives. People have lost entire families. Galadriel lost one brother, and she's making it everybody's problem. And so it feels like her anger, it feels like her drive is disproportionate to the loss. And we haven't exactly had a lot of flashbacks of Finrod and Galadriel being so close that she depended on him for everything. We got one flashback in the beginning, and suddenly Galadriel wants the world to burn, and she's, filled of hatred. I'm not minimizing the loss that she's experienced. I'm not saying that you need to lose a whole family in order for you to want to take revenge. But Galadriel's loss in proportion to everyone else's is not that big. And so for her to make it everyone's problem, disregarding what everyone has been through over one brother, it's like, okay, you're doing a bit much. I understand that everyone processes grief differently, but the stakes are just not high enough from a story perspective. We're not talking about real life, we're talking about fiction. The stakes are not high enough. You lost one person. So I feel like if they wanted Galadriel to be this person, we need to justify why she has become this person. And in the story context, it's not like real life. Writing or fiction is life sort of enhanced or perfected. I really need to see you hurt in order for me to sympathize with why you're going to these extremes. And the writers haven't earned the payoff that they're trying to get. They haven't earned this Galadriel. They've given us an unlikable character without giving us any clue as to why she has to be this way. She lost one sibling. It doesn't justify the level of rage that she's portraying. It doesn't justify going against everyone and everything, basically almost being treasonous in the way that she interacts with her king. There's a lack of respect here. So I think the writers, it's not a case of, I think the writers just trying to be offensive. I genuinely think they can't write. And so no, they're struggling to come up with something that lives up to what we expect, and they just can't do it because they're not good writers. Another thing that I want to point out, and what gives me the sort of idea that they're not great writers, is the dialogue. Tolkien's dialogue was brilliant. It did what dialogue was supposed to do. It conveyed a message. It was lovely to listen to. On my channel, I've analyzed his speeches, especially the speech given by Theoden and the speech given by Aragorn in front of Mordor. So, and a lot of those speeches were written in the style of what Tolkien wrote. Some of them, like Theoden's speech at Helm's Deep, were taken directly from some of his poems. Where Are the Horse and the Rider? So they really stayed true to his to Tolkien's spirit in that sense. And so where they've deviated from it in the series, the fact that the writers are not as good writers as Tolkien is really becoming apparent. And that's why I think if you're holding on to the hope that this is Tolkien, or this will become more like Tolkien's work, I think you're in for a very rough ride, because even if they made the characters long-haired European characters and tried to stick to the story in aesthetics, the writing is so bad, it would have been a disappointment anyway. So I don't so even with the presence of black dwarves and black elves and different races, which I think is probably the least of the problems, but even with the presence of that, the writing is so bad, it would have been a disappointment even if they stuck to the aesthetic. Um, so let's see. Also, don't make elves the main characters. The Silmarillion's bird's eye view can get away with it, but here it ruins any sense of the elven mystique. Tolkien himself argues this point in On Fairy Stories. I agree with that. Making the elves the main characters, I think, is the wrong thing to do. You see, the thing is, um, for this, I think it was going to be difficult keeping the elven mystique with anything from the Silmarillion, because the elven mystique is ruined by almost every story in the Silmarillion. I think another name for the Silmarillion could be elves behaving badly. It's just it's it's elves and we see them. Even though we're seeing them from a bird's eye view, they make so many mistakes and they do so many horrible things. It's really difficult to see them the same way we saw them in The Lord of the Rings. Because in the Silmarillion, we're getting their history, we're seeing their dirty laundry. So I don't think any story that was to come out of the Silmarillion would have been really difficult in trying to keep the elven mystique, because of that very reason of us seeing their dirty laundry. So, um, I agree with you saying that they shouldn't have made the elves the main characters, but I don't think for the same reason. I think the show writers aren't skilled enough to write a story to adapt a story from the Silmarillion. And so I think if they had stuck to human main characters, perhaps they would have had an easier time of it because they could have kept the short hair and everything else that they wanted to do. But r- Tolkien's elves are a lot more sophisticated than what they've made them come across in. Even though in the Silmarillion we see their dirty laundry, there's a sophistication to them that's kept. And I don't think the writers are skilled enough to keep that. So I agree with your point, but perhaps not for the same reasons. So let's see. If you're going to market a series based on Tolkien's name, I think you have an obligation to respect his lore with a bit of respect. I agree. I definitely agree. Um, And to your point, I mean more that the elves here just feel like people with pointed ears, little elf. They are mortal beings with a closer relationship with the earth than humanity, which these elves don't imply. I definitely agree, which is why I was making the point that despite the fact that we see their dirty laundry in the Silmarillion, there's still something ethereal about them. There's still a difference in the elves to men. The conversation between Finrod and um uh, I can never say her name, but the mortal woman, the one who falls in love with one of Galadriel's brothers. I can never pronounce her name. Uh, Andreth? Between Finrod and Andreth. They have an interesting conversation. And that conversation is about the difference in perspectives between the elves and between men, because men die, and the elves are immortal unless they're killed or become weary. So I don't think that the showrunners even read that conversation or even understood the differences between elves and men. Ironically, the dark-skinned elf in the series, I feel behaves the most like an elf, and maybe Gil-galad, but the rest of them do not behave like elves. Elrond, sort of. I can kind of see the regal nature that they're trying to put on with Elrond, but it's not as much as I would like, but it's not in any way a problem. I think Elrond is perhaps one of my favorite characters from this series because he feels like an elf. A very young elf, a very young and perhaps immature elf because he doesn't feel like the self that we saw in the Peter Jackson movies, which I guess is a given. But Elrond isn't too bad of a character. I wish his hair was black and long, but he's not too bad of a character. Um, and I think that the dark-skinned elf, I think what's his name? How something. But he, I feel, behaves more like an elf, especially with his interaction with Branwen. I think he behaves like what I expected an elf to behave like. I just again wish his hair was longer. So Rings of Power Elrond looks like Steve from Stranger Things. I can't lie, he does. Which is why I feel like I wish the aesthetic was closer to what Tolkien was describing. Um, because I just think if you if you take away the aesthetic, you're taking away something fundamental. Tolkien's work redefined fantasy as a genre. So taking away the aesthetic dampens some of what's iconically uh, Tolkien. So yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that they decided to do it this way, but I think it comes with the fact that the writers were trying to be unique. They wanted something that had their names on it. rather than Peter Jackson's sort of vibe. Because Peter Jackson, we called them the Peter Jackson movies. He's made his name. He's immortalized himself in that way. And I believe that the writers of the series were a bit envious of that and perhaps wanted that for themselves. They wanted for it to be, I don't even know their names, but they wanted it to be something that we associated with them. They wanted it to be distinctly their own. Um, but I think they misunderstood the fact that Peter Jackson tried to do justice by Tolkien. He wasn't trying to make something that would immortalize him. And in trying to do right by the books, he immortalized himself. Whereas I think the showrunners went about it the wrong way, and so have ended up with this. And the writers they hired are probably not equipped to handle something like Tolkien. I mean, a lot of people aren't. It is Tolkien after all. It's not like um they took Harry Potter and tried to adapt it. They tried to adapt something that was substantial, something that requires a more experienced hand. I will never not applaud someone for taking on something that is difficult, even if they fail at it. So I think they deserve to sort of be applauded for trying to take on Tolkien's work. But shots fired at Harry Potter fans. I am a Harry Potter fan, but I can it's not Tolkien. So while I do like Harry Potter, I'm a Slytherin, so I definitely love Harry Potter, but um I also know the difference in skills. And JR sorry, J.K. Rowling's didn't take 40 years to come up with it. So there's just a difference in there's just a difference in the skill level, there's a difference in the expertise. And I think you can recognize that without sort of insulting Harry Potter and its fans. So I definitely wasn't trying to do that, but there is a difference in the skill level and in everything else. So so Dee says they'll have some half-baked arc for her, I'm sure. Doesn't mean that they've done what they've done thus far is not already bad. I'm it is. It's cool, it's cool. Um, what they've done with Galadriel definitely is not great, especially when you consider that House of Dragon is running at the same time. And so we have an almost direct comparison when it comes to these two series. And House of Dragon is doing a lot better. The writing is a lot better. And so, in comparison to the Rings of Power, all its flaws are just on display. It's unfortunate. And I think um, it's a bit of a waste of money considering how much has gone into this series. But I hope it'll be a learning curve for Amazon that you can't just throw money at something. You have to actually select the people that are going to be on this project very carefully. And I don't think you can underestimate a fan base as diverse as Tolkien's fan base. There are people who are grandparents who grew up reading those books, and there are people now who are getting into it. And I think this show, uh, in comparison to Peter Jackson's movies, in comparison to the series that are coming out and are around at the moment, it's not a very strong series. For the most expensive series ever created, it's not strong. You can claim that it's the most expensive, um, but it just money isn't the deciding factor in whether a series is good. Now, are there any characters you think the writers did right by? Personally, and this might be a bit controversial, I like Disa. I wasn't expecting to like Disa, but I do like her. I think that she is a character who is likable. I actually found myself liking her in the trailer, I think this is something that the Amazon did incorrectly. Partly because they were scared that people were not going to like the storyline they um if they revealed what it was, because the storyline, let's not lie, isn't great. But the character of Disa is brilliant. I really like her. She's likable. She is well written in the sense that she's loyal to her husband. She's not overbearing. She's a dwarf. I really feel like she's written well in terms of being a dwarf woman. We were missing dwarf women in the Hobbit and in the trilogy, just simply because they didn't really play a big part. So I think when we look at Disa, she's not a bad starting point for us to look at dwarven women. She's not a character that's brought into the story more than she should be. She is the wife of Durin, so she's in there as much as she should be, and she's not in there any more than she should be. So I think she's a character that they've done well. I will give them that. They've written her well. Fair enough on Disa, but the marketing for her still flops since she's not the first female dwarf. I think the marketing overall for this series was a terrible thing because um, unlike the rest of, if we take House of Dragon for example, House of Dragon's marketing was great. They actually told us what was going to occur within the series in the trailer. I think by I think Amazon knew that there was going to be a lot of controversy with the choices that they had made in terms of storyline. So I think they tried to keep the story itself under wraps, and that was not such a great thing because people really wanted to know what this story was about, and the trailers didn't tell us any of that. The trailers were so vague. You couldn't get a sense of what was going to happen in the trailers. And so characters that could have been great if their storyline had just been revealed a little bit were not revealed at all. Marketing used to be, don't you want to be cool? Watch this to be cool. Now it's want to be virtuous. Watch this, prove you're virtuous. Um, yeah, basically. But I think the just picking up on Brian T's comment, do you think the series is more of a fan fiction than an adaptation? I do believe that, yes. It's more of glorified fan fiction than an actual adaptation of the series, of Tolkien's work. The reason I say this is because with an adaptation, there are changes that are going to be made. You cannot have a complete piece by piece adaptation to screen from a book. It's just not going to happen. Some changes have to be made. And so um and even Peter Jackson made changes to the books when he what was I even about to say? But even Peter Jackson made changes in his adaptation. So it's not about the fact that there are changes. It's what kind of changes do you make, and do they fit in with the themes of the original work? So, just to branch off really quickly, because I think this is a good comparison with the point that Flynn has just brought up. I'm convinced that they avoided having the diversity make sense as a statement of virtue to say this is more important than sense. Rather, this is how far we'll go for the cause. Ironically, this is my favorite character too, but Amazon's PR team using minorities as human shields doesn't make me feel good either. I definitely agree with that. I think in this modern age, minorities tend to be used as a shield for bad writing, where if that character is badly written and met with the displeasure of the fans, the corporation can just say, well, you don't like them because you're racist and you hate XYZ, which may not be the case, but corporations love doing that because it's easy. Um, it means they don't actually have to hire people who are good writers. Um, and it means they get to, because this is the thing, if you hire someone who's not great at writing, if you hire somebody who hasn't gotten that many projects, you can pay them less. And so it's just easier for the corporation to do the lazy work of blaming the fans who don't like a change as and just say that they're racist. It's the cop out basically. So just have Haradrim protagonist or something. This could tie in excellently with Numenor's downfall, and it makes far more sense than having elves or proto hobbits as the main characters. I I agree so much with this. I personally do not know why they decided to I don't know why they decided to deviate from what was in the books. Obviously, I don't know what specific rights they had and did not have. So take this with a grain of salt. But in the Second Age, the Haradrim and the people from sort of the global south came down into Beryllian, and they colonized that area because after the War of Wrath, things were in a disrupted state, and the allies of the the allies of the elves had gone over to Numenor and set up themselves in that way. So Middle Earth was sort of in darkness, and those from the global south came down and into the west and colonized that area, and they enslaved many of the people there. So that would have been a very interesting dynamic to build upon. The foundations for that were set up in the first age with the some of the Haradrim making alliances with the elves. So you have the alliance that was made between I can't remember the specific name of this character, but there was a certain alliance between Maedros and a character that was of perhaps an African or Arab descent. So you have diversity there. You could have built upon that. That was in the first age. The repercussions of that alliance, the fact that there was a betrayal within the alliance, carried on into the second age, where you had the Haradrim having a grievance with the men of the West. So the Numenorians come back into Middle Earth, liberate these areas, and so those in Middle Earth begin to pay tribute to Numenor. That's the dynamic between the humans in Middle Earth. So that could have easily been explored. You don't even have to paint the Haradrim as villains because they had legitimate reasons to dislike each other. It wasn't along racial lines, it was around allegiance. So certain people gave their allegiance to Morgoth, and certain people gave their allegiance to the elves and the Valar. So these are things that could have been explored. This is a story that could have worked. But I think it's just the hubris of the writers that they wanted something that was distinctly them. They wanted something that would make their names, and they weren't concerned with what Tolkien wrote. That's I think that is probably the case. There's also the other alternative that they just simply didn't have the rights to that story, even though it's what makes up the majority of the Second Age. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they may not have had the rights to everything in the Second Age. So um I don't know why they didn't go for the established stories that could have had minorities, that could have even fleshed out some of the things that perhaps Tolkien didn't write about. So, and maybe even given us a sympathetic look at the Haradrim, but they just didn't decided not to do that. Um, I don't know why, because the story they're trying to tell now to me doesn't make sense. Another thought of mine is that they may do this later because in the character they in the what's his name? Halbrand. The he's heir in the series, in the context of the series, he's the heir to the Southlands. The people who were in the Southlands allied with Morgoth. So they've made the people who allied with Morgoth white. Okay. Perhaps later on in the story there could be an alliance between Harrod and between the Southlands, and maybe this disrupts Numenor's intention to get tribute from the Southlands and creates political tension. I don't know where they're going with that. I don't think that's particularly the direction they're going, but I don't know how else they would plan to introduce minority characters and it makes sense, because the introductions they've made thus far, with there being a minority elf and minority dwarves, they don't make sense. But ironically, those happen to be the characters that are somewhat likable. So I I honestly don't know what this series is doing, and I personally have resigned to looking at it as something independent of Tolkien or something Tolkien inspired rather than Tolkien's work, because I think that's possibly the only way to enjoy it and overlook the vast difference in skill level between the writing of this series and Tolkien's writing. If you're looking at it as a project that was supposed to be loyal to Tolkien's work, even the dialogue will really annoy you as you watch this series. You have to divorce it from Tolkien in order to enjoy it or to um, appreciate some of the choices. One of the things that annoys me about this series is the camera, the camera work. It it's great most of the time. I will give it that, but occasionally they have these shots that don't make sense. There's a scene of Galadriel riding on a horse with one of the faithful, with Elendil. So she's riding on a horse down a beach, and that shot is given so much attention for no reason. There is no reason why that shot should have that much attention. It was even in slow mo. It didn't add to the story. It had no consequence. It didn't matter. We didn't need to see Galadriel riding prettily down the beach because there was nothing that drove the plot forward in that scene. And so the writers, the showrunners, the writers, whoever, they make decisions like that, and we have a bunch of shots that don't add to the plot, don't push anything forward, don't make sense. They're just pretty to look at. And I feel almost like they're trying to distract us from the fact that they haven't done a good job of writing. So we have these pretty shots that don't make sense. In in anything visual, if you focus in on something, it is because you want us to um, pay attention to what is going on in that scene, because something is going to come out of that scene and become important later on. A clue may be hidden in there. Um, Something is going to come out of this scene. But the scenes that they have, for example, the slow mo horse ride, nothing comes out of that. It's not mentioned again. It's not important. It's just a pretty shot, and it runs for so long. It's not just a few seconds and we're like, oh, that's a pretty shot, and move on. It runs for so long. It's outrageous. And I thought to myself, why? What was the point of that? And again, that's horrible writing, because if I described a tree for no reason other than describing the tree, as in where that tree is will never come up again. What that tree produces, what fruit it produces, will never be mentioned again. It won't matter. Nothing will come of that tree. I've wasted your time. As I'm a writer that's wasting your time. I'm not doing anything important. And so that's what the writers are doing, or the director, or whoever edited that particular scene. They added it to look pretty, and it was not necessary. It didn't need to be there. And they do that quite a few times. There is another. Let me just go to the chat and answer some of the questions, because some people have written quite a lot. So let's see. So Callum says, "Thank you, Malika. The marketing crowd needs to listen to you. Even Critical Drinker acknowledged the stupid fan blaming tactic." Don't worry, DD. He says, "I have a lot to say. I'm sorry. It's fine. This is what this live stream is here for. It's for us to discuss. So I'm more than happy to read out your comments and sort of just give my first thoughts. As you can see, this live stream is perhaps I have points, obviously, but as I'm answering this, as I'm answering your questions, more things are coming to mind, and it's not necessarily organized in a sense. It's a back and forth. So Didi says, "Well, I can tell you a reason why. Galadriel is a character that people recognize. People know hobbits. Most people don't know what the Haradrim are, so making them in the center wouldn't market well." I agree with that. I know that the writers wanted to use sort of so Galadriel and hobbits act as buzzwords for the writers. It's like, oh, Galadriel, Lord of the Rings. Hobbits, yeah, I know hobbits. I like hobbits. I'll watch this. It's definitely a good marketing strategy. However, you do have to keep interest. I When I was watching the trailers and sort of having initial thoughts about the series before it came out, I sort of thought that initially this series would get a lot of viewership because it's something that's Lord of the Rings, because there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. It would have a lot of buzz around it and people would tune in to watch it. But as time goes on, that will wane because I didn't think they had what it took to sustain that interest, and everything that was coming out was not getting me excited, was not really making me engaged. It was just leaving me with more and more questions, and what I was seeing was not encouraging. So I sort of predicted that as time went on, it would not be enough. That in those buzzwords like Galadriel and hobbits would not be enough to keep interest. And I still sort of hold to that prediction because initially, this series was watched almost everywhere. Even the amount of people who said they would not watch it, um, definitely did not equal to the amount of people who did. A lot of people watched this show, and I do think it was a very successful opening week when the series came out. Um, but as time goes on, with the reactions that I've seen online, the reactions that I've seen from people who are even partial to diversity changes and things like that, the story isn't strong enough to hold their attention. It's not doing a good job of that. And it's a shame because the actress who portrays Galadriel, I do not think she's a bad actress. I think she has a presence about her, especially when she's sort of staring. Her gaze is quite strong. However, she is short. So it's always quite funny when she's walking past somebody, and she's just not intimidating anymore. Once we see the height difference, she really just isn't that intimidating at all. I think they could have done something about that. Perhaps use tilted flooring in order to give her some height, because I do think Kate Blanchett is quite a tall woman, and so she had her presence was sort of made even more intimidating by the fact that she was tall, that she stood next to people and she didn't disappear um into the background. Her height gave her that imposing presence, and it fit in so perfectly with the description of Galadriel. She's a tall elven woman, and so when we look at the Amazon version of Galadriel, she definitely has a presence about her. Her pronunciation of Quenya words are is just beautiful, courtesy of her being Welsh. So I do think there is a lot about the actress that can be applauded, but she's just vertically challenged. So it's really difficult for her to it's really difficult for her to be imposing. I think they could have helped her by using sort of tilted flooring so that to give her a bit of height. At least make her as tall as the men. At least. Because Galadriel's presence is supposed to be empowering. It's supposed to give us this sense that she can't be played with. But because they haven't created a presence around Galadriel, she's having to do a lot more action and she's having to do too much in order to make up for the fact that there is really no presence about her. That if you just look at Galadriel, she doesn't look like an elf. There's nothing spectacular about her. As Dee said, the elves are just humans with pointy ears, and that's a problem. So yeah, I don't like the fact that they've taken away the mystique of the elves. So the Amazon description of Galadriel is actually about her being tall, deep-voiced, and athletic, which Miss Clark really is not. I find it I find it funny all my reactionary opinions about how the women are too short and beardless. Because it's not a wrong feeling to have. It's because they're supposed to be a certain way. Um, Tolkien didn't write to appeal to certain beauty standards. He didn't he wrote if his women were supposed to be tall, they were tall. So, and it wasn't about, oh, this is like women are supposed to be in real life are supposed to be 7 feet tall. No, it's that the elves have a presence to them. And so when you're trying to adapt that into a live action, that needs to come across. Kate Blanchett in real life doesn't sparkle or glimmer or glow. I think glow is perhaps the best word to describe what she looks like in the Peter Jackson movies. She doesn't actually glow in real life. So, Dina said, I'd be fine with women with women being 7 feet tall, just say. uh, well, everyone has their preference. But like I was saying, Kate Blanchett doesn't actually glow in real life. Like she's not walking around with a silver light all around her. But in the movie, because she needed to have a particular presence, she was given that. And for all of the money that has been thrown at this series, they haven't done very simple things. Maybe that might be stylistic. Maybe they're just trying to be so different from Peter Jackson's movies that they want to ground it a little bit. But I don't think that's the right choice if you're trying to make an adaptation of Tolkien's work. So Flynn says even the people on the PJ movie said Kate's presence on set as Galadriel changed the way everyone worked. That's the real divine feminine at play, and it's more powerful than a toxically masculine woman. I definitely agree with that. I definitely think that um Galadriel in the Amazon series has leaned too heavily into what the writers believe is a masculine um energy. I personally like Elendil. I think that he's a firm masculine figure, and I don't think that he Tolkien had female warriors like Eowyn and Haleth, whom I found far more interesting. I think Haleth was an interesting character, just branching off away from my point about Elendil, but um, I think Haleth was a very interesting character because she was very proud and she didn't listen to instruction, and she led her people down a really difficult path in a very similar way that Galadriel led her comrades in the beginning of the series through that icy period. So I definitely think that Heleth is might be where they've taken sort of influence for Galadriel, but as Dee says, it's all about the execution. It hasn't been executed well in the series, and I think that's why there's such a big problem. Like I was saying earlier, it's not that they this series doesn't have characters that could potentially be really interesting. It's not that the series doesn't have a storyline that is salvageable. It's not that it doesn't have good themes. It's the execution is trash. I'm sorry. The execution is not great when you compare it to Tolkien, which is brings me to my point. When you take it out of Tolkien and you just have it as its own thing, um, then I think it's a little bit better because you're not comparing it to a giant. You're just taking it as what it is, which is not a brilliant piece of work, but it's not terrible. It's only when you compare it to Tolkien's work and to what we expect from something that's an adaptation of Tolkien that everything wrong with it becomes just 10 times worse. But if you take it out of that, I do think it can be something of an enjoyable series. I agree, but if you don't want us to compare it to a giant, don't use the giant's name. Um, I do agree with that. Um, they shouldn't have used his name, but like I said, they didn't have. I don't know if this story that they're trying to tell as an independent story away from Tolkien is strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet without him. I don't know if it's strong enough to garner the amount of attention to definitely be able to require that sort of budget without Tolkien. I don't think you can approach um, Amazon with this storyline and they accept it unless it's attached to something that is actually profitable. Because this storyline as a pitch for them to give you $1 billion is not worth $1 billion. But if you say, well, it's attached to Tolkien, then there's a lot more willingness for for them to give you that budget. And I think that's kind of where Tolkien's name comes in. You can justify spending that amount um if it's attached to Tolkien. You can't justify it if this story was someone else's. Um, it's probably not real, but I did hear a rumor this was originally going to be a Dragon Age show, whose script got adapted. If so, that would explain the elven slavery thing, I guess. Um, I mean, nothing would surprise me at this point. I don't know much about Dragon Age, but it does really feel like this series isn't Tolkien-esque. They've just given characters the names from Tolkien without taking very much else. They've taken some things like Numenor, and the history behind how Numenor came to be, but they've really not taken too much that would make this story distinctively Tolkien. So, so with Flynn's point. Oh yes. So Flynn was talking about the sort of divine feminine at play and how Kate Blanchett's presence made everyone work differently. I think it's something like this. If one person is playing to a standard that is higher, natural competitiveness sort of kicks in and everybody wants to up their game. So if you're working hard and especially if something that's visual and going to go to the public, it's not staying between you. If you're an actor and your co-worker is really shining and really portraying that character, it lifts the energy. And it's this and that subtle influence is typically associated with feminine energy. It's not an overt influence like rules where you have to follow this law. It's a subtle influence that I'm going to be of this particular standard, so everyone else feels the pressure to raise their level of acting or to raise their level of action so that are on that same standard as me, or they're doing better in order to match the energy I'm giving out. So I definitely do think that Kate Blanchett was the perfect Galadriel. She's tall, she has a presence about her. She's a brilliant actress. Um, that's not to say that Miss Clark is not a brilliant actress herself, because you can have a great actress, but the director's rubbish, and there's only so much the actor or actress can do with a rubbish script and a rubbish director. So this is not in any way hatred or slamming the actors. I think the problem is with everyone in the back office. It's with Amazon green lighting a script like this. It's with because scripts are very dialogue heavy. It's the writers. It's the deviation from the it's the deviation from Tolkien's work. Al Pacino is a great actor. Don't think he'd be a good Galadriel either. I definitely do. Again, this is where casting directors come in. This is where people who are casting the right role comes in. I do not think Miss Clark is a terrible Galadriel, and I think she could have been a lot better if more thought was given into the props and stage directions, and the director wasn't whimsy about how he did things. This is the reason why I say this. There are scenes in which she truly shines as Galadriel, and um uh, I can almost see what they were trying to do with her. But like I said, if they'd used tilted flooring, if they'd made her appear taller, if they had given her an ethereal presence, which can be done with lighting, it would have been a lot better if they had toned down her brash actions and her senseless decisions. I personally believe this actress could have been a new but really great Galadriel. I don't think the problem is the actors and actresses themselves. I think the problem is with the writers and the directors, because the problems I see with this show come from them. It Things like camera angles. There's this scene in one of the, I think it was episode 5, where Halbrand and Galadriel are having a conversation, and the camera just zooms in on their faces for no reason. You see, their expressions are very powerful in that particular scene, but they're only powerful because they're looking at each other. And so there's tension between the two characters. But when we zoom in on their faces and we broke out the other characters, suddenly it just looks like they're making weird expressions into the camera. And it was really uncomfortable to watch. It was just like, what's going on here? What's happening? And those are decisions that lie with the director and those editing and the writers. So I blame them. I don't blame the actors, because again, they were cast by everyone in the back office. And I don't think the actors were bad decisions. But it's the directors, it's the writers. They're just not good. And so they could have the best actors and actresses. They could even get the old cast back, and still it wouldn't be great. Because you can only work with what you're given, and the material that these actors have been given is not great. So I don't think it's a problem with the actors. I think it's a problem with the writers and the directors. So Didi says there is a problem with film, TV, honestly, where we project everything good and bad onto the actors, even though the invisible writing and direction is the real source of everything. I definitely believe that, because you can only work with what you're given, and the actors are just what we see. It's like the person who goes to a shop and or has a service, and they get angry with the person at the desk, not even the person who served them, just the person who happens to be at the desk that day. It's not their fault, but it's the one they're the one that we see, and so they're the one that's the easiest to take our anger out on. It's like people who have sent death threats to the person who plays the dark skinned elf. He did not ask to be cast in that role. He didn't ask for he auditioned, obviously. Someone approached his agent, but no one I he didn't say, "I'm going to play it," and nothing else. He was cast in that role. And so to send and the only reason he could be cast in that role is because the writers and directors said, "We want someone who looks like him in that role." So it's not his fault, and the fact that he gets death threats and the fact that people go on his Instagram and bully him is just atrocious. And honestly, it doesn't help the cause of the fans when people do things like that, because then it almost does look like fans are racist, and it does look like they don't care about the actual story and they just care about the fact that it doesn't look like what they're expecting, when the real issue is the people behind the scenes. Yeah, I was also Flynn says, yeah, I was also referencing something Vigo said in an interview about her being on set, brought out this whole air of respect and chivalry from the whole team. Gigi says things like death threats are sadly something anyone with sufficient attention on themselves get nowadays. I blame the internet more than anything else. Flynn also says, and how it was like being from playtime to something from with greater meaning. I'd like to think the divine feminine is that powerful. Um, I definitely do agree with um that sentiment that the divine feminine can subtly influence an environment. If we have to think about what femininity does, it creates an environment that allows those living or existing within that environment to flourish. And so setting the atmosphere is inherently a feminine thing to do. This is not to say that it's a woman's responsibility to set a working environment or to set the scene or to set the environment, but femininity in of itself kind of does that naturally. Um, so let's see. Callum says, please correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the death threats part of the marketing manipulation, or are there genuine mean racist people out there? Um, yeah, there are genuinely mean and racist people out there. Racism didn't go away just because slavery was abolished. It's the internet. Like Didi says, it was always going to happen to some extent. Um, and people also feel like because you can't see them and they're behind a screen that they can say anything and they can do what they like. So while yes, it was always going to happen, it doesn't make it excusable in any way. Um, there definitely has been more focus on the racial changes of the characters than on the actual writing itself. Not from everyone. Like I said, there have been people who I like the critical drinker, for example. I really love his channel. He hasn't focused too much on that, and that's because it's a very small thing in comparison to everything else that's wrong with this show. I mean, personally, I wouldn't care about it if they got everything else right. It would just be like, they changed them, but who cares? For example, they Disa was not meant to be black, but she's black, and she's still one of my favorite characters just because she's written well, and her race doesn't necessarily play a part in her experience. So, I think the race element isn't that big of a deal. Would I prefer it if it was in line with what Tolkien wrote? Of course I would. I fell in love with the stories and not with the racial element of of his works. But it's so small in comparison to everything else. And the fact that some people have made it their entire channel or their entire life's purpose just to talk about the race element, it's yeah, that's problematic. I'm very sorry because you're coming from an angle that's not good. It's not the best angle to come from. Um Didi says there's actually some precedent for dwarves in Norse mythology having darker skin. Um, Didi also says people in general just need to be nicer to each other. I agree with that. Amen. And that the drinker always gives things a fair shot. I think I do believe he does. Which is why I really like his channel. Um, Language wise, we don't I don't always agree with him, but everything else definitely. He's very entertaining. So I quite like his channel, and I think he has been very fair in his critique of the Rings of Power. Comes across as someone who really tried to give it a chance, and it just didn't work. Like I'm also saying, it's not working. You can't just throw in minorities and expect the support of people uh, who are also minorities. It doesn't work that way. It's a little bit insulting actually, because you have to write them as good characters. Now that being said, the fact that Disa and the other dark-skinned elf are perhaps the most in line with what I expected from the elves and the dwarves, and sort of put uh my connection seems to be running out, but I think they anticipated how much backlash would come out as a result of the racial changes, and so they did try to write these darker skinned characters better than some of the others. I think that's what they tried to do, because for Disa and the other dark skinned elf to be more in line with Tolkien than almost anyone else, it feels like they put more attention on them, perhaps anticipating the backlash. Do we get a weekly live update on the series? That is what I am attempting to do. So hopefully not letting YouTube dictate how much I can post, and trying to utilize all the options that YouTube has, so the live stream being one of them. So I hope to do a weekly live update of the series, and also to talk about other series that are going on, like House of Dragon, for example. A lot of people have been telling me to watch that. So I'll be getting onto that. I will be watching it with my family. Because my dad loves things like that. So I'm going to be watching the House of Dragon with him, just as I'm watching Rings of Power with my family as well. So let's see. Callum says all of us and Malika will agree that Tolkien's stories were already culturally diverse, with hobbits, elves, dwarves, and men. Definitely, the racial element of it was not a big deal in Tolkien's world. Um, and there were different races of people. Uh, all of them happened to look Caucasian, but well, not all of them, because we do have people from the global south who were spoken about, and they did play significant parts in the stories, which is why I don't understand why the writers of this series didn't develop on that, because it's not like they didn't exist in Tolkien's lore. So let's see. Wow, I'm tired. Upholding Tolkien's vision to be as close to one-to-one as possible should be the first priority, then good writing if you're going to deviate from the source material. Like you said, the good writing of. Um, I don't think you can uphold Tolkien's vision without good writing. I think good writing comes first, because, like I said, it's not a complete one to one, and you can never have a one to one in a series. Even Peter Jackson deviated. For example, Aragorn's character arc in the books, Aragorn was never in any dispute about what he intended to do. He always intended to go for the throne of Gondor, and that was the bride price for Arwen's hand. That's a major change to make, and yet Peter Jackson made it because it suited his story that he was trying to tell. It suited the storyline that he could fit in within these three movies. So I definitely do not think it's possible to do a one-to-one, but you can still uphold Tolkien's vision even if you're not doing a one-to-one. And I do think it's important to uphold Tolkien's vision, which is what Peter Jackson was able to do uh, in his adaptation. Good writing will always fundamentally be a part of that. I don't think it's a second to that. It is in your ability to hold up the vision. You do have to write well because you're pitching a story to everyone that you work with, and you have to write it well. You can't just take Tolkien's story and then say, this is what we're doing. You do have to shape it and form it into the medium of screenwriting. You can't translate it one to one. Screenwriting is very dialogue heavy. And so you really have to almost turn the story into a dialogue piece in order for you to translate it. So it's impossible to do a one to one, but I do think you can uphold the vision, and the way you uphold that vision is through good writing. Let's see, let's go up slightly. It's hard to uphold the perception that people's problems is solely a deviation from his vision with when there's a pattern of people having adverse reactions to anything that's considered pandering in fantasy. That's true. I'm just but yeah. Um Pandering definitely is something that a lot of people have spoken about because it's annoying. I will admit that pandering can be very annoying because, and it's not necessarily because of the change itself. It's because it's not executed well. So let's say, for example, the new one that everyone's sort of talking about, which is The Little Mermaid. It feels like a move that's pandering, and people are focusing on the racial element of it. A lot of people have been extremely racist about the way that they're going about it. For example, the posters that people have made to substitute the official posters, like the little slave and stuff like that, which is just. But the race of the mermaid doesn't matter. It doesn't have anything to do with the story. Whereas I see the argument that having a black elf doesn't make sense because all the elves came from one place. All the elves were influenced by particular culture, and so their homogenous race, especially with the fact that elves live forever, they don't have a lot of children, and they grow up very slowly. So what it takes for races to become a thing would not naturally happen with the elves. It would make more sense for that to happen with men who reproduce very quickly and a lot and live relatively shorter lives. So you could argue from that standpoint that race matters a bit more in The Lord of the Rings. It doesn't matter in any sense of the word in The Little Mermaid. So the focus around race um in in a lot of new movies, it's a very volatile sort of thing because we tend to talk in blankets as um like we say something is pandering, but we don't actually look at why certain decisions were made. And it's easy to just sort of do a swipe and say everything is pandering and go off that reaction. Um, but I think if we stand back and actually look at what we're fighting for, which is the story of Tolkien, the aesthetics matter. And you don't know how annoyed I am that the elves have short hair. I'm not really able to get over that. I thought I would. I can't. It may seem so, and it is relatively small in comparison to everything else, but it irks me. It irks me so much that the elves have short hair. I don't understand why they made that decision. It doesn't make sense. But, you know, just like the race element, it's such a small factor that I'm not going to bemoan the whole thing publicly. Privately, I will, but publicly, I'm not going to go online and be like, oh, it's long hair. So I think the race element also falls into that. It's not the most important thing. What is important is Tolkien's writing, it's Tolkien's themes, it's Tolkien's story. It's not your story or the writer's story, it's Tolkien's story. And when I watch the series, I need to be able to see Tolkien's story and not your fan fiction of Tolkien's story, which is what I believe is the main problem. So let's see. You were glitching. Am I the only one seeing this? Oh yes. I was glitching for a bit because my laptop was running low, but I've plugged in my charger, so that shouldn't be a problem. Mhm. Didi says, I personally have writing plans going to draft something next year. It's got a female non-white protagonist. It's not, it's really not done out of any social political obligation, though. It's just what she is. That's the way I like them. Um, this is the thing. If the race of your character matters to your story, then it should come across in the story. For example, having a white Milan would not make sense in any sense of anything because we know, even if the world portrayed is fictional, we know it's based on ancient China. The aesthetics are ancient China. They're distinctively ancient China. Dress, everything is ancient China, and cultural language that's even used is ancient China. So to have a white Milan would just not make sense in the slightest, which is why I also am a bit bugged about the elves having a black elf, because there is some kind of there is a cultural element there that you could use to argue that point. But like I've been saying, it's happened now. So I think what can be fixed is um the story. Just throwing out the actors who have already begun the series, it won't happen. So the story is what I think we need to be focusing on, because I do think that can change. Um, I hate pandering myself, but case in point, the reaction to Finn in Star Wars was unjustifiable, and there's no law to hide behind to claim that's your issue. I definitely agree. What Finn faced in Star Wars was abominable, and I it just proves that it's difficult for fans to make their point without being lumped in with people who don't even care about the story but just want to use that opportunity to make noise. Okay, let's see. Flynn says, I'll be the first Pakistani Irish Wakandian. Okay, let's see what else is in the chat. I am a bit behind with the chat. Then says, I'm not sure the race aspect is that small of an issue, to be honest. I think the execution has mainly been exploitative and comically provocative at times, which I'd say is a net negative for race relations. I do agree with that to some extent. Now, this is the reason why. The reason why I say that race, in comparison to everything else, is small is because if the story could have a good plot, if it could have a good plot, if it could write its characters really well, then I think the race of the character would matter less. But it's because the writing of the story is so bad that everything that's negative about it becomes so much more of an issue. And that's why the race element is what it is at the moment, where it's an issue. But if the story was actually a good story, if the writers of the series had actually bothered to create a good story and we just have different races, the race would not be as irksome. It wouldn't be so much of a big deal. But because everything is bad and they're just hiding behind the fact that they're hiding behind the race card, it becomes a big issue. So I agree, but I do think that if we focused, well, if the writers, not we, but if the writers focused on the actual story, then the race wouldn't be so big of an issue. It would not be a positive change. It would not be a change that the fans welcome, but it wouldn't be a deal breaker, I believe, if the story was actually a good story. Exactly. So what ends up happening is people who care about the integrity of stories and then racist trolls end up being conflated, which people seem to be comfortable being associated to. I think people who fall into the former need to do a better job in separating themselves from the racist trolls so that the criticism can be addressed without being accused of being racist. Yes. Um, I think they can do a better job of this by being less emotional in their takes. When you are really emotional and you get online and you type what you're feeling in the very first instance, you're talking from a place of a lot of emotion, you're talking from a place of a lot of heat. And so sometimes your language that you use where you call someone an idiot or you call someone a moron, you sound exactly like the person who's just coming to be a troll. But if you could make a logical argument and in that way distinguish yourself, it's a lot harder to lump you in. um you know, people can complain about Jordan Peterson's message as much as they like, but because he's so eloquent, it's really difficult to pin him down and say, "Oh, he's this," because he'll make an eloquent argument right back at you, and it'll be difficult for you to say, "Ha, I've got him." So if the fans could take a moment to calm down a bit and then sort of eloquently um make their point, it would be a lot easier to distinguish between them. But when you're using the same words, when you sound exactly the same, it doesn't matter if you actually care about the integrity of the work or if you don't care and you're just using this as an opportunity to be nasty. You sound the same, so to an onlooker you are the same. And yes, that's why Twitter is a dumpster fire, because I do understand it's really difficult to make a logical argument on Twitter when you have a limited amount of characters that you can use. Um, but that's kind of why I stay off Twitter. so, so them managing to conflate the story with a discussion on diversity means we can't criticize the story without criticizing race, which is their only defense. And they're I say they're plain in writing. So, hi, Sequoia. The tribalism runs deep in our species. If it can be overcome at all, and I doubt it can, it would take millennia from an evolutionary perspective. Let's be positive instead. Dear Malika, how grateful are you for your followers? I am extremely grateful, Callum. I think I have some of the best followers online, and I'm very proud to say that, and I will stand by that. You can argue me on that, but I do think I have some of the best followers online. I have people who respect my opinion. I have people who are not afraid to counter what I say and to do so in a respectful manner. So I'm really grateful for everyone who follows me, for everyone who takes the time to to speak to me and to engage with this. This has been a very successful live, in my opinion, and it's my first one. So thanks, guys, for making it into this discussion. And I like to talk, so I've spoken for an hour and 44 minutes now. So I'm very grateful. Let's see. It's amusing to watch because the very people who call people snowflakes, overly emotional and devoid of logic, fail to acknowledge the hypocrisy, two sides of the same coin. I definitely agree with that. It's actually hilarious how many times people just turn out to be the other side of the exact same coin. And this is in various sort of communities where you have extreme feminists and you have the red pill. Um, so wait, please answer Sequoia's previous question. Okay, I'll head up. Da 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 da. Wow, this I didn't even realize how busy this chat has been. Okay, I'm trying to find Sequoia's question. Da, 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 da. Okay, so the question was about tribalism. Okay. Um, I mean, I'm African, so I know a lot about tribalism, in the sense that in the West, for the most part, I don't think that you guys have tribes in the same way that Africans have tribes. So even though you like call a bunch of us like Nigerians, Ghanaians, Cameroonians, South Africans, um, on the ground, it's a lot more like we know which individual tribes we come from and which tribes marry into each other. So, in terms of tribalism, there's definitely that sense. And it's definitely more alive. And it's amazing how you see the same thing online, where this particular group of people doesn't talk to this particular group of people, and this group aligns with this group, and this group of tribes don't align with that group of tribes over there, and you see this online all the time. So Sequoia says tribalism in the sense that people tend to identify with the group, then adopt an us versus them mentality. I completely agree. Like I was saying, you see this online all the time, particularly between certain groups who tend to be more vocal online than other groups. So, where they form alliances and they sort of group up to take down a certain group. I think the most obvious example is the polarization in politics, where it's become a left versus right. And when you look at the actual policies, they overlap so much, but what's being sprouted out there is that you can't find any middle ground between the two, when that's not the truth at all. But because it society is as or especially online has become so polarized, it feels like there's no middle ground. And it's bled into culture where something like Lord of the Rings, which was supposed to be inherently escapism, has become such a politicized thing where articles are writing that the left the right wing people have taken over Lord of the Rings, and people accusing Tolkien of being racist. And we had the Tolkien Society group that did their meeting, and we had things like transgenderism in Gondor, and Sauros was supposed to be escapism. So then being accused of some for some sort of bigot, so their actual points never get addressed. The business of progressives is to go on making mistakes. The business of conservatives is to prevent mistakes from being corrected. Bigotry, I'm tired. Yeah. I think it's quite late, but I just wanted to sort of round up and make sure that I answered everybody's question before I go. But just to round up on Sequoia's point about tribalism, one of the amazing things about Tolkien's work was that it was largely escapism. And so we could leave behind the troubles of the world and go into this world where it had its own troubles and it had its conflicts, but we they were somehow manageable compared to ours. And so this show, I don't know if it's grasped that escapism. I don't know if it's grasped what made Tolkien's work what it was. And so, in that sense, it's failed to be something that's an adaptation of Tolkien. Um, but like I was saying earlier, if you took it out of being Tolkien, and you just watched it as a show that happens to be that's inspired by Tolkien or something like that, it's not bad. It's not terrible. It has some good things about it, like Deeza's character, which was a pleasant surprise. Elrond and Durin's friendship, I like that. It's sweet. Um, oh, one point I wanted to make. I've remembered this point throughout the conversation, but I've always forgotten it, and I'm gonna say it before I forget it again. The music. Right. The music is not terrible. However, it's too epic. It's too much. Um, in the Lord of the Rings, we had there was a small collection of songs that were all revolving around the Shire, and these songs were not as epic as the rest. They were slow. They could be played in the background of conversations, and they didn't take away from the conversation. Um, they had a lot of pieces in the Lord of the Rings that were really background pieces. And so when they were played, they sort of added to the ambience of the scene without taking away from the scene or being overbearing. The music, when you listen to it on its own, is great. I think that's I think the music is awesome. I do think it's amazing, but there's too much epicness. I downloaded every single one of season one's soundtrack, and I listened to all of them. All of them are too much. Even Wandering Day, which is supposed to be the Hobbit song, it's too epic. So when it's being played on the scene, we're expecting something life changing to occur because the music is swelling up and we're like, okay, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Nothing happens. We're expecting some catastrophic thing to happen to the hobbits. We're expecting some kind of life changing experience to happen to one of the hobbits or to happen in any of the other scenes, and nothing ever happens. So the music is too much for the scene. It's overdone. And if it were in writing, we'd say it's overwritten. So that's the problem, and that's why I say that the writers are the problem, because the person who composed majority of the music for the series also composed the music for the series Outlander, and they did a brilliant job of that. They had so many small sort of casual 1 minute songs that worked really well underneath conversation. That's not the case in the Rings of Power, and that is as a direct consequence of what has been requested from them. The director or the writers have requested a particular type of music from this really good composer, but he's only followed the instructions he was given. And so, you know, that's another reason why I believe that the writers and the directors of this show are actually more to blame than everyone else. It's not that they didn't have the right ingredients. I think they did. It's just they're not good writers. They don't know how to write. Because I almost try to imagine everything that they've done in a written form. And when I sort of visualize it as a written form, it's overwritten, it's overbearing. Some bits are not well written at all. Some bits are very vague, and it, it doesn't it doesn't mesh well together. Some scenes are left on such a cliffhanger that the tension just dies. And when we come back to the scene, we don't care anymore. Especially the scenes where we have Galadriel speaking with the Queen of Numenor. We don't care when we get back when we get back to that scene because we flash to the hobbits, which completely downgrades the tension. So by the time we get back to the conversation between Galadriel and the Queen, we don't care what they have to say anymore. So it's all a writing problem, which is why I think that it can be fixed, because bad writing can be fixed. They have good ingredients. They don't have brilliant ingredients, but they have good ingredients. And that is promising. So let's see. Flynn says it's somewhat of an attack on escapism from the Ideologue's perspective, I was surprised that the same composer, Howard Shaw, was involved. I think approaching it as a fanfic definitely takes the edge off. Yes, it does. It definitely does take the edge off. I think Howard Shaw did the titles. I could be wrong though. Um, I was a casual Lord of the Rings fan, despite it being my second favorite universe, until I came across your channel and a few others that were similar. When I don't analyze it too critically, I can still enjoy it. I do agree with that. I do think you can enjoy the series if you're not a fan, if you're not like an avid fan of the books. If you are, you do have to detach a little bit and accept that it is not what you were expecting. It's not Tolkien, it's something different. Um, Great point about the music. The different departments could have probably been organized improperly to work together because it doesn't fit the picture. Yes. Similar to what you said, I can't tell where they're going with the story, which is why I ended up preferring House of Dragon over the Rings of Power. Sequoia says, I have to say, I was rather hoping for a Fall of Arnor series. Sadly, they did not consult me, which would have been a pretty bleak story, I admit. I don't know, my like this overly epic music would make mundane chores like the apocalypse. Hollywood tropes have affected the majority of sci-fi and fantasy. Indeed, they have. I think John Howe wasn't just the concept artist for um, Peter Jackson. He was the armor expert too, and Rings of Power haven't even used him to inform their armor. That's the elves' armor made of wood. That really annoyed me. Um, yeah, I visually it's not bad. I just don't think it's practical. To me, it didn't make sense practically because wood is not great for armor. So I didn't know whether that was a ceremonial sort of thing, but he went charging into the tunnel wearing just that without any backup or telling anyone. Again, the elves tend to act in a way that's senseless. I don't know whether they're trying to make them more relatable, but most people, I believe, would not just jump into a tunnel without any form of backup just because. But this again, this series was designed to appeal to everyone. And so some of the choices, perhaps to an adult, seem ridiculous, but to a child may seem reasonable. So I don't, I think maybe they were trying to do a lot of things and they weren't skilled enough to do half of them. So that's the problem that I see. Because when I give them a long stick with the race issue, with even the music, even though that's still a writing problem. But when I give them a lot of leeway with how they want to portray um, the story, the writing still irks me a little bit. So Double A says episode 6 is giving me hope. I've yet to watch episode 6. Um, so I look forward to watching it, and I take that comment, Double A, as something to look forward to. So I'm looking forward to episode 6. Haven't watched it yet. Um, I was really tired that day, and my dad came home late from work, so I didn't watch it because I'm not watching this series without him. So I look forward to watching it. So Callum says, "Imagine elves ironing the robes to the tune of Bridge of Khazad-dûm. How about the riders of Rohan turning on their washing machines to the Rohan theme?" I mean, that wouldn't that would be such a weird way to use the music. It's supposed to fit in with a particularly epic scene, and so to have them uh doing their washing to that theme would probably it'd be a little bit out of place, which is the problem with the Rings of Power, where mundane things are given too much of an epic theme. Um, let's see. We'll never understand the need to appeal to the masses, as if a checklist must be fully met when what made this universe universes in fantasy and sci-fi so good was focusing on making a good story. Yeah, I mean, the appeal, the need to appeal to the masses is money. At the end of the day, we in making it for everyone, you make it for no one. That's true, but when you when you think of the perspective of the writers being we have to make something that makes money, so the wider you sort of cast your net, the more likely you're going to pull a lot of fish, and I think that's the mentality that they were going for. So let's see, Theo, thoughts on Theo. So oh yeah, Theo's the Branwen's child. um I don't really care for that child. I'm sorry. I really don't care for that boy at all. And that's the problem with this series. I don't care for a lot of the characters. And we've had to this at this point we'll have had 6 episodes. I've watched 5 of them, all of them an hour something. You've had the length of literal movies to get me attached to 3 characters, maybe. That's not a good thing. I shouldn't be attached to just 3 characters after you've had the length of literal cinema movies. I should be invested by episode 5. I'm not that and if I was being truly honest, if I wasn't watching this series to give commentary on it, I wouldn't really bother watching it that much. I mean, I would watch it and kind of catch up after a few episodes have gone by, but it's not something I would go back and really watch and really be invested in. For example, I was watching The Chosen. I love that series. I binged watched that series. It was so good. But with the Rings of Power, it just doesn't have that appeal. That can obviously change as things go on, but it all remains to be seen. So, do you think they'll follow through with the multiple seasons despite its current reception? I mean, they might, because they've just again they've put a lot of money into this, so I don't know if they will pull back on it. I think they have time to make changes, and if episode 6 is as promising as Double A says, then perhaps things are looking up already. And I personally want things to look up because I will never want something by talking to be portrayed in a negative way. So I hope that they do go on for multiple seasons, and I hope that the writing improves as they go on. That's my main thing. Let's see. Let's go up. So yeah, like I was saying on Theo, I don't particularly care for him. He's just a typical kid. I hope he plays a part, and I hope I come to like him. He just seems like a bad child. That's all he just seems like a naughty, kind of rebellious child. I mean, he did something brave, going to get food for everyone, which is a good thing, but I haven't emotionally connected with him. So let's say he died, I really wouldn't care. Um, so let's see. Sequoia says some ancient cultures used limited paper armor, which was excellent against broadhead arrows, but the Elder had steel, so why not use it? This suspends my suspension of disbelief. Definitely. Um, that's one thing about writing, especially fantasy. We have to suspend disbelief. Callum, you can self-promote as much as you like. The floor is yours, to be honest. You can self promote as much as you like. Um, so I have no problem with it. But like I was saying, Sequoia, I don't know why they made the decision to make it out of wood. My only thought was that maybe it's sort of a ceremonial sort of thing, or it's not something they wear to actual battle. It's more of just like an emblem sort of armor. It's not actually supposed to be taken into anywhere serious. As far as we can tell in the series so far, there hasn't been any sort of big altercations in the land. There's a big deal out of made about the fact that Galadriel is really the only one who seems to believe there's still evil in the land. And so I think maybe that's why they used wood. Um yeah, so maybe it's just ceremonial and there wasn't actually supposed when they're actually going into war there's metal being used. Okay. Appealing to the masses has the problem of the law of diminishing returns. I don't know why they chose to appeal to the masses when they have such a solid fan base in Tolkien fans already. But they've obviously made their decision, and I just hope that they will improve from here on out. I hope they listen to the fans. That's the main thing that I'm hoping for. I hope they listen. I hope that they don't double down in what they've done and they going forward they improve. Um like I said, there have been good things. Wandering Day is a good song. I liked the little montage that they had. I'm still really confused about the that big guy with the Harfots. I don't know who he is. I suspect he's Gandalf. I suspect that he's Gandalf. But I don't know why they're taking so long with him. I know that they have multiple seasons to stretch, so maybe I'm just being impatient because there isn't really anything making me really want to watch this series other than the fact that I'm reviewing it for my channel. So I don't know what he is. I'm hoping he's Gandalf. Maybe this is they explore his how his relationship with the hobbits started. But yeah, they chose an odd angle to go with. One of the theories I have about that particular character is that in the books, at times we see Gandalf become more menacing. And in the trilogy, for example, Gandalf um doesn't seem to remember that he was Gandalf for a moment when he becomes Gandalf the White. He says, "Oh, Gandalf, that was what they called me, Gandalf the Grey." So maybe they're developing on that particular idea and really running with it and saying in the beginning when Gandalf first came, he didn't know what he was, where he was. He just needed to go somewhere, and the hobbits kind of taught him about Middle Earth in that sense. Maybe that's what they're trying to do. And yes, if Meteor Man is Gandalf, that would be a really big that would be a really big change. But I think it's the best case scenario because if he turns out to be some kind of evil person, it's like what? I'll be so confused because no one evil is supposed to know about the existence of hobbits. And Gandalf is really the only one who pays attention to them. So he could only really be Gandalf. And if he isn't Gandalf, I'm going to be so confused. Unless they make him Tom Bombadil. I really don't that could be an option. Maybe he's Tom Bombadil. But again, that doesn't really make sense. I really feel like Gandalf is the only option that makes sense. Um let's go back to the chat. Do you think any character is severely miscast? Bronwyn. Yep, Bronwyn. I feel absolutely nothing for this woman. I don't. The speech she gave wasn't inspiring, and I think the writers knew that, which is why half of the people who were with her left and went over to Sauron's camp. I don't understand why there isn't really like a connection between her and the dark skin elf. I don't really feel anything. I think they introduced their romance too early. I think we should have seen the build up, that we should have seen their relationship build, and then maybe it becomes something we root for. Even though Aragorn and Arwen had a relation, were already in a relationship before we met them in the trilogy, we got to know Aragorn for a bit first, and we got to like him. And then, when we met, the introduction that we got to Arwen in the movies was really nice because we we saw the playful banter when she says, "What's this? A ranger caught off his guard." So there was a bit of playfulness between the two. There was something that we're like, "Oh, that's kind of cute." With Bronwyn and the elf, I'm sorry, I don't feel any chemistry. They just look at each other. Their theme is nice because I've listened to their theme. It's nice, but I don't feel anything. And Bronwyn as a character isn't particularly striking to me. Um, so yeah, I don't. I think perhaps she was the character that if I had to think of somebody who was severely miscast, it's her because there's a lack of tension or chemistry between those two characters as far as I can see. There are a few gazes that are held, and she holds his hand, but I don't. There isn't really anything really making me root for them, and this is the problem. It may not actually be that she was miscast, even though I think if I had to think of somebody that was, it would be her. It's again a problem with the writing. I've been harping on about this entire live stream. So I feel like I'm just going over the same point and again and again. But the writers are doing a lot of things that they haven't earned. So they give us these longing glances, but we know nothing about these people. So their longing glances could be glances of hate for all we care, and it wouldn't matter. They haven't done any form of introduction. We don't care about them. There's a difference between showing us your character and then letting us travel with your character. We haven't traveled with any of these people. They've just been doing things. And so while we've been introduced to them, like, hey, that's Galadriel, hey, that's Halbrand, hey, that's this person, we haven't traveled with them. So we don't care about them. They could be strangers on the train for all we care. And as they're showing us these characters, they're not building an emotional rapport between the audience and the characters. So they're giving us a lot of action and a lot of big stake things, but they haven't done the work to earn these things. Remember, before we meet Aragorn, before we meet anyone, we stay in the Shire in the movies. We stay in the Shire for a while. We get to know the ins and out. We see a massive party. We go around with these people. We see the relationship, the normal relationship between Gandalf and the hobbits. We get a sense of what everyday life was like, and we're integrated into this world. We have a speech by Bilbo where he tells us what hobbits are like. We see the funny little things they do. We get to like these people. And so this when their lives are at risk, when the ring comes up and becomes something that threatens these people, we actually like them. My light has gone off. But we actually like these people when we see them because they becomes important to us. We've traveled with them, but we haven't done any of that in the Rings of Power, and they haven't earned those things. And I think that's the problem. So it's a problem with the writing. There's been no build up. And so the payoffs that we're getting are not satisfying. So let's round this up because all my equipment is telling me that it's time to go. But I'm going to round it up and sort of just uh, finish off the questions. Okay, let's go. I don't know if Game of Thrones has warped my perception of consequences in TV shows, but the most recent episode made it hard for me to enjoy the show. Like I felt I felt like I was watching a children's cartoon. Yes, I always knew that this was, again, it was not going to have the same consequences as Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones was based in realism. And so if a character is going to die, they're really going to die. And the plot armor was less than what you will have in Lord of the Rings, and in anything that's supposed to be associated with Lord of the Rings. Remember, it's also targeted at everyone, so that's even young people or like kids as well. So the consequences are not as much. We've had a few elves die, so I guess that's something. They have given a little bit of tragedy. But again, those elves died before we even really got to know them, and so their deaths don't matter as much. Though I do like Halbrand, not Halbrand's, what's his name? The dark skin elf's expression when they do die, because we know that they mattered to him. So it's, again, it's not the actors that I'm criticizing, it's more the writing and the directors that I think should take all of the blame. Okay, let's see. Didi says that the Meteor Man might be a Balrog. It's definitely possible that he is a Balrog, though I personally would not like that option very much. If he was a Balrog. The lights on again. Okay. Granted, in Lord of the Rings, they've had their moments, but the pacing was off, where you don't get to properly be present with the despair before everyone is saved. Exactly. Pacing, again, is a writing issue, because if you think of your episodes as chapters, that's again a writing issue, and that's the biggest issue with the show. Sequoia says, in my experience in the corporate world, the more money involved, the more there is to lose, and the fear of the diversity and inclusion department escalates in proportion. It's definitely the case, though I do think that they had an opportunity to have inclusivity and diversity, without ruining the story or without deviating as much. There are a lot of factors in play. I think a big part was that the writers wanted something that was distinctively theirs, and it didn't feel like a continuation of Peter Jackson's, and there is a bit of hubris in that. But yeah, and also the fact that Amazon introduced its diversity clause, so there was a lot of pressure coming from outside with the Tolkien Society conference that happened a few months before the series came was was released to the public. A lot of the talks, as I covered on my channel, were very sort of left wing and very progressive, and so I do believe there was a lot of pressure from institutions that claim to represent the fans. um and yeah, I think there was a lot of pressure, and so this is a result of all of that, and whether it pays off, only time will tell. So far, it hasn't been the most encouraging, and we can only really hope that it improves from here. Double A says, "I love the way you talk. Thank you so much." Judy says, "Always enjoy hearing your thoughts, Malika. Thank you guys so much." Yeah, I'm even slurring a little bit because it's so late, but I really want to sort of just round up and not just end abruptly. If Meteor Man is Gandalf, that is a really big change. Yep, definitely. Um, Money talks, and this series represents a lot of money. Oh yes, $1 billion is nothing to sneer at. It's an incredible amount of money. And so it would be a real shame if we don't see that, if we don't see that sort of come to fruition, if we don't see the fruits of their labor manifest in a really positive way, because so far it's been really negative, and I just hope that this is the chaff. A lot of stories especially when they're being written as a series or serialized thing, they don't always start off the strongest. Berserk, for example, didn't have the strongest start, um, but it went on to be massive and great. And even though this isn't Berserk, it's just what I thought of at the top of my head. But I hope that this turns out well. Nothing in me wants this to turn out badly. So um I will hold out hope until it becomes foolish to hold out hope. Some already think it's foolish, but I'm just really praying that this turns out well and that it turns out to be something that they can be proud of and that the fans can also be proud of. There's a theory that Bronwyn is Sauron in disguise. I have to go and research that theory because that sounds outrageous. Meteor Man, there are a lot of different Maya, very few of which were ever detailed, so it could be anyone. That's true. However, I think if they want to sort of keep up the if they want to draw people to the series, if they want to use familiar names. I mean, they've already used quite a few familiar names, so I think they might follow along in that line of in that way of doing it. Earlier fool's hopes, like Smile Gandalf. Yeah, that's what everyone who's sort of an actual fan of the series and still continuing to watch it is holding on to a fool's hope. As Koya says rather sarcastically. So yes, mass appeal trumps fan base every time. Yep, from the sort of business standpoint, it does. They always want to rake in as many people as possible rather than being quite niche. Um, which is a shame because they have a solid backing, they have a solid fan base, but they just they make these decisions, and I hope it works out for them because $1 billion is not something to sneer at. Okay. Like watching a character die you just met 5 minutes ago while emotional music plays. Like, oh no, everyone really liked that guy. That's true. Because, like I was saying, half of the characters I've talked about, some of them I don't even remember their names. And that is how this series is, where it I haven't really connected to many characters. I like Elrond. I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for Galadriel just because I hope she'll change. I like Halbrand. I think he's a likable character. Isildur irks me. I don't like him. Maybe it's because um in uni when you do group projects, there's your grade can be brought down by just one person. So seeing his deliberate action, his selfish deliberate action, get his two friends kicked out, it just brought me back. It brought me back to certain projects where a few people's selfish decisions cost me a grade or cost me something. And oh, I just projected all of that onto that character. I just projected everything. I was like, I really dislike you. I really dislike you. And I know they're setting him up to be this heroic character, but unless gets himself together, oh, Isildur is going to remain a character I don't like, especially since the fact that he's the reason why um we're learning like a lawyer. I take my projects very seriously. So because I know how much effort I've put in. So when you're the reason why I don't get what I deserve, it's like, so yeah, that's Malika law over there. But like I was saying about Isildur, I know that his ending, we all know his ending from the introduction to the trilogy in the movies, Galadriel's monologue. We all know what happens, and even when Elrond says, "I was there 3,000 years ago when the strength of men failed." Um, so we all know what Isildur is going to cost us, and I think that's why he's not perhaps the heroic sort of character that we're looking to. Um, and his father seems so much more dependable and so much more courageous. So yeah, I like his father, Elendil. I like him a lot. He seems like an honorable, strong character. Um, so like I was saying, they have good a good few characters. It's not all terrible, but they have a lot of problems with the writing and the dialogue. For example, Fingon, not Fingon, Finrod, uh, his advice to Galadriel, where he says, in order to see the light, you must first peer into the darkness, or something along those lines. It was meant to be profound because when she remembers it, there's this glorious music playing in the ground. It's yeah, I'm definitely tired. Playing in the background. So it's supposed to be some kind of profound advice, but it falls a bit flat because when you hear it, it's like it doesn't sound very it doesn't sound grand. It doesn't sound like what we would expect one of the wisest and fairest of all the elves to leave Valinor to say. Um, Double A says everyone loves Durin, but to me he's less interesting than Thorin. I don't see anything kingly in him. He feels like he could merely be a member of Thorin's company. Um, yeah, I definitely see that he still lacks a bit, but then if we have to also consider Thorin's story and where we meet Thorin versus where we meet Durin. Durin's father is still alive and still reigning. Durin is still a prince and he's relatively young. Thorin is older when we meet him. He's also gone through a lot more. Everything has been taken from him. He's been hardened by his experiences. We're meeting a character that's in a massive platform of privilege and relative comfort versus a character that's been stripped of everything and has been brought low and only has the hope of restoring his homeland to be his pride, and he's had to lead his people through death and everything. So they're very different characters. And so I think comparing them in that sense is not necessarily fair to Durin. I do like Durin. I love his relationship with Elrond. I think they sort of bounce off well with each other. Is the day named after Durin in reference to Prince Durin or King Durin? So Durin is the first dwarven king. And so the dwarves believe that their ancestors are reincarnated, and the name Durin is not just given lightly. It's only given when they believe that that Durin has come again in a particular line. And so it's more referencing the first Durin than it is referencing the characters that we've met. What the elf said about finding light in darkness isn't that a core theme in all of Tolkien's writings? Yes. However, finding light in darkness, it's more of the thing is in Tolkien's work, it's more that the light in the darkness is that keep your eyes on the faint hope. Whereas what Finrod said is that you have to peer into the darkness in order to find the light. These are two different ideas. You don't need to go looking for hardship in order to find light and love and direction. It's that when if you do find yourself in that situation, then look for the light. Look for stars in the dark night sky rather than focusing on the endless darkness. Don't throw yourself into an ocean and then look for the light. Don't deliberately go into trouble to look for light. Those are two different ideas. Tolkien was never an advocate for throw yourself into trouble in order to find the light. In fact, one of his lines is um, that Thorin says is the world would be a better place if we all cared about food and home. That's Tolkien's idea. The Shire needs to be protected because it represents what Tolkien loved, what Tolkien's heartbeat was: peace, living a simple life. Adventure is undertaken to protect that. And that's the hero's story. The hero's normality is thrown out of balance, and he only confronts the chaos to preserve peace. He doesn't go looking for trouble. That's the traditional hero story, is that he doesn't go looking for trouble. Trouble comes to him, and then he looks for the light within the trouble. It's not throw yourself into an ocean like Galadriel did. That's not the and again, be, because they're trying to be profound, but they're not sticking to Tolkien's themes, they are saying things that sound great until you actually look for the substance, and you're saying a bunch of nothing, or you're giving horrible advice. And so that's why this, again, it's a writing issue. Anybody who is trying at least to be a great writer would know with a second reading that this line doesn't make sense, and this line is not in line with Tolkien's themes. But because the writers, again, are not great, and they're trying to be different and put their own name on Tolkien stuff, um, they're coming up with a bunch of things that are not profound. And that happens a lot with the dialogue, where the characters are supposed to be saying something that's epic and the music is really requiring us to pay attention, and they're saying a bunch of things that aren't consequential in any sense. So yeah, that's the series is just a bit all over the place in terms of its writing. So okay, according to some, Halbrand is Sauron or discount Aragorn. I doubt Halbrand is Sauron. Um, the reason why I say this is because um, I don't. The way they're setting up Halbrand, I don't think he's going to be Sauron. I think he's actually a man, and that he's done terrible things in his past. The montage where he has a fight with the Numenorian seafarers is evidence enough that this man can fight, do a lot of damage, and he knows he's capable of doing a lot of damage. Um, but I don't think he's Sauron. I think that would be such a giant that would be such a giant leap. It would not be justifiable in any sense, and I don't even think they're crazy enough to do that. And I don't think Galadriel, because remember, Sauron is a Maya. Even if he tried to disguise himself as a human, there would still be something off about him. And I don't think there's enough off about Halbrand for him to be Sauron. About being discount Aragorn, um, I yeah, I get the sense they're trying to do something like that, but yeah, I get the sense they're trying to give us an Aragorn like figure, a bit, albeit a more um sassy version, if I could use that word to describe him. I do like Halbrand though. I think he's a good character, and I like how he bounces off Galadriel, and I think he will be a vessel for her change and her character arc over time. Okay, let's see. Yes, Samwise is a lovely character. He's definitely one of my favorites. I doubt Galadriel is Sauron the whole time, and I hope they don't do that. Um, I agree. Honestly, she does feel like a gender bent Feanor, if anything, and yeah, um, I do, I do think that she gives a lot of Feanor's energy. Um, Faramir saved Middle Earth. Yes, he definitely played a part in saving Middle Earth. His part in Faramir saving Middle Earth was the comment that Faramir does definitely play a part in saving Middle Earth. Um, Galadriel is speaking over in the movie, Galadriel speaks over his part where he's taking the hobbits to his hideout, and she says he only has to reach out, and the fate of all sort of would fall. And his decision to let Frodo go is a turning point. It's another danger evaded, and it speaks to his character, which is why he's one of the characters that I personally love in Tolkien's works. And more importantly, he saved my heart. um Man, I wish we could talk about Jackson's movies instead of this awful show. We will do that. I will talk about Jackson's movies, and hopefully we'll sort of do a stream where we watch them as well, and sort of talk about them, because I'm pretty sure everyone's watched them a million times over. So just watching them again with no talk would be a bit boring. So we will definitely do something like that. I'm keeping up with the tech, so it's the double A's question. Is Boromir a hero in your eyes? I do think he is. He redeemed himself at the end. So he dies a hero's death. And I don't think a mistake disqualifies you as a hero. It's the sum total of everything that you were. And the sum total of everything that Boromir was a hero. So I do, yeah, I do classify him as a hero. Jackson movies were a miracle. The full might of New Zealand was behind those movies too. It was. So I think I've answered all of the questions, or at least attempted to. I will end the live now. I'd say they're a miracle because I think they actually make talking better. It's probably still responsible for a fifth of its GDP. Um, I think the movies offered a different experience. And so we can keep feeding them to you. A farewell dear Bilbo to our next meeting. Ah yes. So just to round up very quickly on Flynn's point about um they might have actually made Tolkien better. I think they made Tolkien more accessible. That does not necessarily mean better, but accessible is good. Accessible and kept to the theme and spirit of Tolkien, which is why I say it made Tolkien accessible, because it offered a doorway into the actual thing, and that doorway wasn't deceiving. The worry for this series is that it may offer a doorway to Tolkien's work, but it's not an accurate one. It's a cover that doesn't match the content of the book. And so it's deceiving in that sense. And that's why it's so jarring for those who have read it to watch the series, because it's not it doesn't give us it's not a true sense of what Tolkien was about. Um we will discuss that another time. Mary was the most irrelevant member of of the fellowship. I disagree wholeheartedly, and I will die on that mountain, because in the books, I will always prefer the books over the movies. The movies were brilliant, don't get me wrong. I love them, treasure them, watch them multiple times a year. However, Mary was brilliant. Mary was a lovely character, and I loved him a lot. And he was very intelligent. He was a very active member of the Fellowship. In the movies, of course, Pippin and Merry served a little bit as comic relief, but I do think they were active and memorable members of the Fellowship. It is Mary in the movies who, and also in the books, if you've watched the extended edition, it is Mary who delivers the blow that allows Eowyn to kill the Witch King. And so Murray is very vital. It's him stabbing the Witch King with a magic blade. And this is even in the movies as well, but only in the extended edition, that allows Eowyn to kill the Witch King, who is a very important villain. So um yeah, I I disagree wholeheartedly. Exactly, Callum. It's extended edition or nothing. So with that, at least Pippin was useful in bringing about chaos. Chaos is what you need to drive the plot forward. And Mary was was very good in sort of keeping Pippin alive. If you even want to say that all that Mary did was keep Pippin alive, he kept him alive, and Pippin brought the chaos. So they were every single member of the Fellowship was useful and needed. It was also Mary's idea to take Treebeard to Saruman's tower, take him to Isengard. So in doing that, he was able to just Mary was actually the one who was able to bring the Ents to Isengard, and it resulted in the destruction of Saruman's factory where he was sort of manufacturing the Urukai. So Mary was very useful and very vital in the fellowship. So, with that, I will bring this live to an end. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This has been a really successful live as far as I'm concerned. And thank you, Callum, for participating. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and for this discussion. It's been absolutely lovely. I wish you all a good day. If you're if you're in daylight, it's currently nighttime for me, so I shall be going to bed. So thank you, everyone in the chat. Thank you so much. Um, I hope you have a great day. This has been the Malika Wright channel.